I would imagine that sexual abuse is pretty well defined and should be fairly recognizable among the majority of the population, whereas child abuse that maybe is disguised as discipline is a little bit more nebulous. Would that be correct?
It is more nebulous, but I think the reason it's more nebulous, and I'm so glad you started with this because this is the main thing I want to get across today. I think the reason it's so nebulous, Don, is because we normalize it. And when anything is normalized, we believe it is the way things are supposed to be. People, I've just had some recent experiences where I had to report child abuse with parents hitting their children. And do you know that in New York and Connecticut, which is where the area I'm from, a parent can legally hit their child with their hand or an implement as long as there are no marks left or nobody deems it excessive force? And that in every state in the union, some form of corporal punishment is legal, which means we are legalizing child abuse.
Well, there are a lot of people who are my age, and I'm talking about 55 plus, who got swatted as kids. And as you say, it was accepted. And you pretty much knew that if you misbehaved, somebody was going to come along and hit you on the butt with either usually an open hand. I mean, sometimes with a paddle, like in school, because corporal punishment was allowed in school when I was in school. Never a fist or anything like that. But it was, as you say, it was de rigueur that if you misbehaved, you pretty much knew that you were going to get swatted somehow or another. And so when did it change, and when did psychologists come to the conclusion that this was not a recognizable and acceptable form of punishment?
I don't have actual linear times when it changed, but what I can tell you my sense is, and this is just my sense, that in the 60s and 70s, as psychotherapy was becoming something that was more well accepted and more people went to therapy and there was less stigma attached, that therapists started working with people who were living with the very damaging, very painful consequences of having been abused, whether it was physical or emotional or verbal or mental or sexual or all of the above. And I know I myself have worked with many people who were abused as children in some way, who live with the consequences until they work it through. I mean, even then they still live with the consequences, but they go around terrified of relationships, of other people, of if they do something wrong, because that's what a child thinks, they've done something wrong, instead of realizing that they just didn't do what their parents wanted them to do, and that the parent got triggered somehow into something from their past. And these people have to do the work to help themselves heal from this, or they can't live the kinds of full lives that they have as potentials for themselves. So, again, briefly, I think it started happening when psychotherapy was more well accepted and therapists started seeing how much abuse there was in our country.
And that brings me, you don't know what you don't know. And if people were raised in that manner and they perceive themselves as a well-adjusted, productive adult, and they see nothing wrong with imparting the same parenting skills, and we'll put that one in quotes, that they experience to their kids, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But apparently that's totally wrong, and people need to realize that it's totally wrong.
Absolutely, and I have two examples of that. One is that in Germany, in the time when Adolf Hitler was a child, there was a practice called child rearing, or that was the way people discipline their children, and it was brutal. And Hitler was terribly, brutally abused by his father and found ways to defend against it so that he didn't cry and he could count the number of beatings, and he hardened himself against his own pain and then grew up to harden himself against the pain that he then wrought. And so did so many of the other people in the country because they were also raised that way. That's the first thing. The second thing is we are dealing with what seems like an epidemic of bullying. I think it's just that it's coming out in the open. And I think we need to look at our society and say, what does this say about our society? Because based on the laws I just told you about, even though we bemoan and fight against bullying and bemoan and fight against child abuse, we are also supporting it, normalizing it, making it socially acceptable. And so I think bullying is a sign of how we bully our kids, not all of us, but I think it behooves each one of us to look inside and see, is there some part of me that abuses children, myself, other people, all of the above? And is that part of what we're seeing in our society and in our world?
Wow, fascinating. Of course, we're up against the clock as always. We'll drive folks to your website, which is judithbarr2rs.com. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Don.